All right. Good morning officially. Welcome to Thursday. I apologize for being a few minutes late. I was just talking to Bijan next door, and Bijan's such a pleasant conversationalist that I totally lost track of time. So, well, I didn't think you'd be too worried, but still, this is your time, and so I'm cognizant of that. Let's see. So Miles is here. Good morning to nope, that's not. There's Miles. Unadi is here. Good morning to you. Crazio's here. Good morning, Crazio. Tufshinsana is here. Good morning, Tufshinsana. Mark is here. Good morning, Mark. And we're in. So, yesterday we were talking about the Pacific War. And again, we weren't giving very, we're not giving fair treatment to the Pacific War here. A lot of things happen in the process. And so, there's a history here that, we could spend time on. But again, history is, always a series of choices, right? You can't talk about every single person and event that occurred. You have to kind of streamline it. And of course, we're trying to cover 100 years in 13 weeks, right? So that's pretty quick. We're about halfway through the course now, give or take. And, we're in about 1945. So we're roughly where we should be, but there's a lot of stuff still to deal with. So again, we're not giving fair treatment to the Pacific War. Apologies to the East. But I'm kind of imagining, since most of us are from the East, that we will have learned about the Pacific War in more detail, or at least I'm hoping that. We said, of course, the primary cause of the Pacific War was Japan, right? Japan was industrializing just like countries in Europe before it, and it needed raw materials. And so, again, it's going through the same kind of things that Britain and France went through 50 years before. And it finds those raw materials in Manchuria, right, in China. And so there's kind of invasions and military campaigns that happen throughout the 1930s with Japan trying to gain access to Manchuria. And as part of that strategy, they decide to create kind of a sphere of influence in the Pacific, where they're able to, I guess in some ways it's very similar to what Hitler had planned for Europe in an economic sense anyway, right? So Japan, wanted itself at the center of this Pacific sphere of influence. They would be the industrial power. They would be taking raw materials from all of these places, manufacturing them, selling them back, making lots of money, and having kind of control or hegemony over all of these areas, right? So in that regard, I guess it's not that different from what Hitler had planned, except for all of the ethnic cleansing and stuff like that. We didn't talk about this yesterday, the Battle of Midway, but it was an important one, right? So Midway is kind of the island that's furthest out, and it was significant for both the Japanese and the Americans, right? For the Japanese, it was supposed to be kind of a radar station and a base to defend from, right? So if the Americans tried to fly toward Japan or sail toward Japan, the sort of scanner array at Midway Island would pick them up, right? And similarly for the Americans, if they could take Midway, that would give them a place to sort of mount further invasions, right? And so again, they do have a big battle. Americans are the ones who will win, and so that will give them kind of a place to start leapfrogging their way toward Japan, which they do, right? And so they move through places like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and they make their way all the way into Japan, where they kind of finally arrive, right? So here's a quick graphic, and you can see Midway right up in the middle of, absolutely in the middle of nowhere, as is Hawaii. But the Americans will kind of launch their invasion strategy this way. And so kind of island by island, they will win victories and find themselves on the doorstep of Japan in about 1945, right? Summer of 1945. of course, we know in 1945 the Americans have developed a new weapon, right? And so this kind of ushers in a different age, right? An age of atomic warfare, an age of weapons infinitely powerful or more powerful than we've ever had in the past, and quite a bit more dangerous as well, right? So we talked a little bit about nuclear weapons yesterday in terms of the invasion of Japan, right? Because those were kind of the two options for Harry Truman to make a decision on, right? It was, do we use these new wonder weapons on Japan, or do we mount an invasion of the island of Japan, kind of old school, if you will? And what were some of the considerations for both of those plans? What do you think Harry Truman had to think about in making that decision, invasion or nuclear weapons? Explain those for me, if you would.
It would have been expensive to invade Japan.
Right.
Traditionally,
Right.
it would take them a year or two.
Yep.
And then we estimated about $1 million lost in the process.
Sure. An invasion of Japan would have taken a long time. It probably would have taken a year, did you say? At least a year. I don't know what the price tag is, but I'm sure it would be millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And again, the estimate is that a million American lives will be lost, right? Never mind Japanese casualties, right? So this is going to be a long, bloody, expensive invasion, right? But then we have these new weapons, and why might you choose to use them?
No lives lost. No American lives lost.
Right? So there's no American lives lost. That's a plus for the American president, right? Doesn't take a year, right? In fact, it took almost no time at all. Yeah. And? Yeah, right? So I'm sure a bunch of money was spent in developing these weapons, but now that they're developed, they can be used. Yeah. But what do you think about the strategy? Like, the strategy here is to take an incredibly destructive weapon and drop it on a city, right? So again, we're not talking about shooting soldiers or targeting military institutions. We're talking about dropping it on a city of regular people going about their lives, right? And again, it's not the first time a city is bombed during the war. I mean, I think we read yesterday about the firebombing of Tokyo and other cities in Japan where, was it Tokyo? They were talking about the phosphorus bombs and the air being so hot that human beings actually just caught fire. Like, yeah, like, so it's not as if, no bombing of cities was happening. So, but yeah, but still, yeah, you're going to annihilate an entire city of people, right? And people who are innocent, right? Just going about their lives, selling food, going to work, hanging out with their kids, poof, right? So yeah, this is a difficult decision. Do you think this is the decision that you would have made had you been Harry Truman? Think so? Why is that?
If they found out you had means to stop it within an hour, but instead you chose to drag it on for a year and something like that, probably another Cold War would happen.
I guess that's true. That's true, right? If it came out later that Harry Truman had the means to end the war, in a few days, and he decided to persist for another year, losing millions of American lives, that might not. Yeah, and his job is to represent the U.S., right? So he's supposed to take care of the U.S. and their people, and this plan definitely does do that. I guess that's true, right? So if we look at the experience that Southeast Asian nations had under the Japanese, it's not
Not the best.
it's not a great one, yeah. So the Japanese are kind of, in many cases, quite brutal towards the people that they conquer, right? Again, I'm not sure that that justifies, you know, destroying a city full of innocent people, but
One idea,
do you think, was there a third option? So we've kind of portrayed it as, you know, invasion or nukes, but is there another option? Could there have been another option?
that negotiated with Japan. But I don't think they ever did that.
Not as far as I'm aware.
I don't think they did.
Not as far as I'm aware.
I think that negotiated something.
Well, I guess I think the Americans had, they were focused on an unconditional surrender, right, which Japan was not willing to do. So that, I think that kind of ended the negotiations before they started. But I don't know. What do you think? Like, what if you took one of those weapons and, you know, dropped it on an island that's nearby Japan, but maybe isn't inhabited,
As a warning.
as a warning, and say, look, the next one is landing on Tokyo unless you surrender?
I would say that would be an option, but they did drop it in Hiroshima and Japan didn't care.
It's true, right? So
Except the
it,
second one.
it's true, right? In retrospect, we know that even using it on a city did not work, right? So yeah, maybe not.
I think everyone is tired of the war. Just want to recoup in 5 years.
Could be, yeah. The Americans have been fighting for a long time, right? A little background for you, just because it's not in the book. Yeah, so the Manhattan Project starts in 1938, right? So this is a full 7 years before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in 1938, we have German scientists working in a lab in Berlin trying to figure out how to split an atom, a uranium atom. And they succeed, okay? And so again, the idea is, of course, is that atomic forces are among the strongest forces in the universe. And when you separate an atom, you release massive amounts of energy, right? Of course, then you have to figure out how to harness that energy, but still, if you can split an atom,
Figured it out, right?
what's that?
How to harness nuclear energy. I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, we figured it out, right? So, like, yeah, nuclear power plants work on
Oh, right.
that principle, right? So our good friend, who you probably know, Albert Einstein, was actually in contact with some of these scientists. And so he learned that there were scientists in Berlin, under the Nazis, of course, working on this technology, and that they had learned how to split the atom. And so in 1939, he writes a letter to the US president saying, look, the Nazis are working on this technology, you probably should too. Okay? Because again, he was worried, right? If they found out how to weaponize this, you know, this energy, it could be bad news for the Allies, right? And so shortly thereafter, they start the Manhattan Project, which is, again, a similar project to learn how to split the atom and then learn how to harness that power, right? And so by 1944, early 1945, they're actually ready, right? They've learned how to split atoms and they know how to harness it in a bomb, right? Now, a lot of people think that Einstein is actually somehow responsible for nuclear weapons, okay? Or that his equation E equals mc squared is somehow important to it. Do you know what E equals mc squared stands for? Or what it is? No physicists in the room? Bijan! So his his kind of famous equation there, E equals mc squared, is energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light, right? And so the big revelation here as part of Einstein's relativity thing is that things that have mass have energy, okay? Usually it's only things that have motion, right? So if I throw this to Andre, this thing will have motion, right? It'll have energy because I've given it energy to fly toward Andre, right? But Einstein's relativity equation is that everything has energy even if it just sits, even if it just exists. If it exists, if it has mass, it has energy in it. And the energy can be determined by his little formula here, mass times the square of the speed of light, right? So again, it doesn't, you don't need this equation to create nuclear weapons, but it helps describe some of what's going on, right? Is that a uranium atom has energy even when it's just sitting there, right? It has mass. But again, Einstein here was regretful for writing that letter, because he wrote that letter to Roosevelt and said, hey, the Germans are working on this, you better, are you okay over there? Mahmoud, are you okay? Yeah? He wrote that letter saying, hey, the Nazis are working on this technology, you better work on it too. But the Nazis never figured it out, right? They never figured out how to weaponize this technology. And so Einstein says here, had I known the Germans would not succeed in developing an atomic bomb, I would have done nothing, right? So he actually felt a little bit guilty and responsible for, encouraging the US to develop atomic weapons and then using them on Japan. And here you can see he was actually denied official US Army intelligence clearance in 1940 because they felt he was a pacifist. They felt he was anti-war, if you will. And so, yeah, he, again, didn't have a part in producing the atomic bomb. His equation doesn't really help you make one, but he was involved in sort of tipping off the US president that the Nazis were working on this technology. But fortunately, the Nazis don't succeed, but of course, the Americans do, right? And so, again, the use of those weapons in 1945, maybe it was a complicated decision, and maybe it wasn't, right? But a traditional invasion, like we said, would have cost a lot of money, a lot of lives. And again, the use of the atomic bombs was simple, right? And in fact, I wish I had it in my slideshow, but there's a telegram from Harry Truman to the guy who's in charge of all the bombers, and it's just this simple telegram, and it says, Dear Commander, you may release when ready, but not before August 3rd. That's all it is. It's just like this very simple, there's this huge decision, right? And it just comes down to a few words, right? I'm going to try and find it. I'm going to go. Oops. Can I find it? No, I can't find it. I'll look for it a little bit later. So, again, maybe this was a complicated decision for Truman. Maybe it wasn't. It's hard to know. But it certainly had pretty big repercussions for the rest of the world, right? Because we know, I think we said this yesterday, that as soon as the US has this bomb, other people will want it as well, right? To level the playing field. And indeed, I mentioned that by the time the first atomic bomb is dropped on Hiroshima, the Russians are already working on their own version, right? They haven't perfected it yet, but they know the Americans are working on it, and so they start working on it as well. And so when The bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. Stalin is not super surprised, but he's more like, oh, okay, I guess they perfected it. But he already knew they were doing it, and he was working on it as well. So maybe the only other thing we should think about is, are nuclear weapons anything that we think about? Like anything that we worry about? Like we worry about climate change, do we not? And what else do we worry about nowadays? Climate change, pollution, overpopulation, COVID, or another infectious disease worse than COVID, right?
Overpopulation only happens. Think about it. I saw this search that the whole Earth lives in New Zealand. If everyone sleeps together.
The whole Earth would what?
Would feed inside New Zealand.
It would.
Everyone would feed.
7 billion people could fit in New Zealand if they stood side by side.
Oh, okay.
So I think overpopulation is just because there are few cities in a big country with open spaces for
True. But it's also interesting to think about, how many resources those 7 billion people need, right? Because I forget the calculation, but certainly people in the world live different qualities of lives or different standards of lives, right? So here in the West, we use lots of energy, right? In manufacturing things and with cars and all kinds of things. And then there's other parts of the world where they don't use really very much energy at all, right? They live very kind of technologically simple lives. If everyone on the planet lived the same quality of life as we do right now, you would need 2.3 Earths to provide the resources for everybody to live like we do right now. You would need 2.3 Earths. And last I looked, there's 1 Earth. So we have a bit of a problem, right? Number one, we have an inequality problem where some people are using way more resources than they should be allowed to, us. And then we have a problem that, if people continue to improve their quality of life, we will run out of resources because in theory, we don't have enough now to live as we are. But if everyone were to live like we do, we just don't have enough, right? There's not enough food, clean water, basic resources to make this happen. So what do we do, right? But even though that's a concern, do any of us think about nuclear weapons?
Beginning of last year.
The beginning of last year. What was happening then?
The US was threatening Iran with
Right. Nobody was worried about North Korea and Kim Jong-un shaking his fist across the ocean.
Yeah, I think Trump said it, then Kim Jong-un also joined in.
I'll get you, Donald Trump. Yeah, well, it turns out if you poll people, nuclear weapons are not really, they're not a worry for people. They're not on people's radar, right? But as of my most recent figures, you'll see here that there are still a lot of nuclear weapons floating around, right? The US having over 6,000 of them. Russia having similarly 6,000 of them. China only having 290. I wonder if that's increased at this point. What's that? Yeah, so there are countries here. Is Iran? Iran's not even. Iran doesn't have. They don't have nuclear weapons yet, do they? They were. I thought they were. Last I looked, I thought they were refining weapons grade uranium, and the U.S.-Iran deal sort of fell through. But they were supposed to stop doing that. But they may be doing it again, maybe. But no, but still, there's a lot of nuclear weapons out there still, right? This is still enough to there is a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, in which, and there's a few treaties like this, where this was in the 1960s, I think, where countries signed on and agreed to not develop nuclear weapons and not to share the technology with other nations either. So, of course, you'll note there that Canada isn't listed because we have no nuclear weapons. We signed on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty decades ago, and we just don't have any of our own, right? And lots of countries don't, right? But then lots of countries do, right? And they're still a danger, right? They're a very destructive force. But maybe we'll come back to that in about 20 years, in the course anyway. Well, not a real 20 years, course 20 years. Give me a couple weeks. Oh yes. Okay. So now I have maybe a little treat for you. Hopefully a little treat for you. I've got a film to show you. And you may think it's kind of an odd choice, or you may not, but I think it's a very interesting film for talking about history, for talking about authoritarian governments, for talking about propaganda, talking about censorship, talking about terrorism, talking about media, talking about infectious disease like COVID. This movie's got it all, right? Oh, yeah. All of those things are kind of crammed into this movie, okay? So there's actually a lot to talk about. So has anyone seen this movie before? Yeah?
I like the one scene where he says, "I hear the bulletproof."
We'll get to that.
I'm not going to describe it.
We'll get to that. No spoilers. So interesting movie. It starts out as a graphic novel, gets made into a movie here by the same people who did The Matrix. Has anyone seen The Matrix? Yeah. Same filmmakers as The Matrix. They did this one. So here's what I would like you to pay attention to. And I'm just going to put these questions in Microsoft Teams so that they're easy to see, okay? Just give me 1 second to pop those in there. That's all right. Okay, so questions are in Microsoft Teams. Now, for online people, you'll have to pay attention because here's how you're going to find this movie. So I can show it in class here without issue, but of course I can't stream it. So here's what you're going to do, online people. You're going to go to the Columbia College website. That's columbiacollege.ca, and you're going to go to the library. Okay. The website may have changed a little bit since, or maybe not, but go to the library tab. When you do, you'll scroll down and you'll be able to see Find Materials, okay? After you find Materials, you'll go in, you'll click it, and you'll see Streaming Videos, okay? So there's your streaming videos. You'll click on it, and then you'll see this one here, Criterion on Demand, okay? So click on that. It'll take you to a screen like this, and you're not going to type in Mean Girls. You're going to type in V for Vendetta, okay? And then you'll be able to watch it through the library for free. Again, if you have Netflix or something and you want to try and watch it on there, you can definitely do that. That's fine. But if you don't have access to it anywhere else, you can access it through Criterion. So one more time really quickly. Columbia College website, into the library, and then into Find Materials, and then into Streaming Videos, and then Criterion on Demand. There it is. And yeah, just search for V for Vendetta and you should find it, no problem. So we're going to start watching here. I think we'll watch first 25 minutes, and then we'll take a 10-minute break and come back and talk about what we've seen, okay? Yeah, okay, so we'll turn you loose, online people, to watch the first 25 minutes, and we'll see you in 35 minutes, okay? All right, and we are back. So, a lot of people have died already in this movie, eh? So, what's going on plot-wise here? Can you explain, just in terms of what's going on in the movie, that we understand what's happening?
Trying to expose the government.
Okay, so we've got some guy trying to expose the government as what?
Hypocrites.
Hypocrites? What else?
I think they lied. I think they turned from the left side to the right side.
Yeah, they're definitely a right-wing, they're definitely a very strong right-wing government, right? That's for sure. What else? Or is that, what other plot stuff should we be aware of? We should be aware of Natalie Portman
Yes.
and the fact that she is Natalie Portman.
Yep.
Who is she in the film? Evie, right? So this, what do we know about her backstory? What do they tell us?
Her parents were political activists.
Okay, parents are political activists, and what happened to her?
5 years.
What?
She was in like some sort of form of like rehab PED for 5 years.
Yeah, she went to some sort of juvenile reclamation project for 5 years, right? So her parents were taken somehow as political activists, and then she was re-educated by the government for 5 years. Interesting. What else do we know about her? Anything?
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Good morning. Works at the BTN, the British Television Network. Kind of seems to have a low-ranking job, right? Who else have we met character-wise?
V.
Who?
V.
V, right? Some sort of
Poetic guy.
poetic
The way he speaks.
guy in a mask, yeah. Very poetic,
Very angry.
very angry. What else do we know about him? We don't know much. He's got skills.
It's for the people.
He's for the people, right? He claims he's for the people. He's got skills, right? He knows how to fight and how to take over television stations and things like that. What else do we know about him?
If I go on, I might spoil the movie.
Okay, yeah, don't spoil it for us. Okay, so we've got this kind of faceless vigilante here, V. We've got Evie. Who else have we met?
There's
Yeah, Adam Sutler. Sutler, yeah. And who's he?
the Chancellor of England.
Right. So England's got a chancellor now, right? Some sort of leader. What does he seem like to you?
A piece of shit.
Okay. Perhaps that.
Like when the song played when the building exploded, it's like I don't want to hear the song anymore.
Right.
Like added to the blacklist.
Yeah, so things are blacklisted, right? So things are, what's that?
It's based on like his opinion.
Yeah, so things are censored by the state, right? Certain pieces of music are not allowed to be played, right? And there's a list apparently, so I guess there's other things on there too. Okay, so we've got Adam Sutler, who's the chancellor. We've got Evie. We've got V. We've got the police detective. Did anyone catch his name?
I can't remember.
Okay.
Creedy.
No. Oh yeah. Creedy is kind of.
No, wait, Creedy's someone else.
Yeah, we saw Creedy, and we'll see him more. He's kind of like the head of internal security. So he's head of like a secret service, domestic police kind of thing, anti-terrorism. That's kind of Creedy's.
CIA.
Yeah, sort of that type of thing. Yeah, CIA or NSA. That's kind of his deal. Whereas the other guy is just a police detective, right? But I'll try to catch his name. I've forgotten it. It's him and his partner. His partner's Dominic, right? So Dominic is the partner. There's the police detective whose name I can't remember. There's Creedy. There's Sutler, Evie, V, and then there's one more guy. She goes to see.
The boss.
Yeah. What was his last name? Is Dietrich. What's his first name?
Starts with the D as well.
No, it was something with some British name.
Gordon.
Gordon. Right. Gordon just walked by. Gordon. Yeah. So Gordon's kind of. We'll find out later. He has his own show. Gordon does. So he's kind of he's a personality at the television network, and he's also seems to be Evie's friend, right? Okay, so how do we see this government? They're called the Norse Fire government. How do we see this government trying to control the people? What sort of methods do they use? What? Yeah, so the curfew. What's a curfew? Yeah, so you're not allowed outside in the streets after a certain time, right? So there's a curfew in effect. What else?
Censorship.
Right? Certain things are censored, right? With like the song. How else is the government trying to control people?
With the news, censorship.
What's that?
Censorship as well.
How do you mean?
Like the choices, like what to say on the news. What the people hear.
Yeah. So what do they say about the news? They say, oh, we're
It was planned, like the bomb, demolition of the building was planned, and the fireworks was an attempt to make it like cool.
right. So there's some fake news going on here, right?
Propaganda.
What's that?
Propaganda.
Yeah, there's some propaganda, and whose show is responsible for a lot of propaganda? We saw him. No, the angry guy on the television. Evie's getting ready.
That's Gordon, right?
No, that's not Gordon. That's actually another character. That's Prothero. Right? So Prothero's got this kind of show on BTN where he's kind of an agent of propaganda, right? And he spreads a lot of hatred and misinformation and propaganda, right? So there's propaganda through Prothero's show, right? Because the chancellor says, this is what I want Prothero to talk about tonight on his show. So the government's controlling the network, they're controlling Prothero, they're controlling the news, they're censoring things, they have curfews on people. What else? There's more. We'll see more of it as the movie goes on, but maybe you caught some additional stuff.
I can't remember. It was in the first 35 minutes or in the last 35 minutes.
Do you remember when they're in the meeting with the chancellor? The chancellor's got his big face on the screen, and he says, what are people talking about? And he said, oh, we've noticed, an increase in conversations about the building, right? About the explosion. So they're monitoring people's.
Oh, the telephone.
Yeah, they're spying on their own citizens, right? They're listening in on everyone's phone conversations, right? So we've got surveillance of the citizens, right? And maybe one more thing. Who does Evie meet in the alleyway?
Oh, the finger.
Yeah, finger men. And what are they? Men with fingers. They're dangerous, but what's their occupation?
I think they explain it later, right?
Their what?
They explain it later in the movie.
They don't explain it, but who are we meant to understand that they are?
Enforcers.
Yeah, they're enforcers. They're government agents, right? And they're out there, well, supposedly making sure people follow the rules, but abusing their power, right? They're about to sexually assault Evie before V steps in, right? So that's a lot of layers of kind of control and management, right? We've got censorship, we've got control of the media, we've got surveillance of citizens, we've got secret police, right? Creedy is the head of them, and then we meet some of the secret police in the alleyway with Evie. That's a lot of stuff so far, right? That's a lot of stuff. What evidence do we have that the government is strongly nationalistic? What is nationalism again? A strong sense of belonging to a nation, and what's a nation? What's that? It's not the country itself, but culture is part of it, but yeah, the people, right? So a nation is a group of people who see themselves as a people, right? People who have common language, common culture, common history, right? And so nationalism kind of says that yes, those people belong together and that they should be in charge of their own affairs, right? So where do we see this kind of pride in nationalism coming out in this film so far? Yeah. So there's a couple things going on here, right? The sort of the treatment of minorities, right? And sort of, yeah, visible minorities and minoritized groups, but also this kind of nationalistic pride, right? I'm an Englishman and I'm goddamn proud of it, right? And so there's this, nationalism woven into Prothero's story or show, while at the same time he's talking about all these people who don't belong in the nation, right? Homosexuals, Muslims. Who else does he mention in that little tirade? Immigrants, right? People with diseases, right? Disease-ridden filth or whatever he says. Yeah. So that's a right-wing thing to say, right? Right-wing, people on the right wing are very strongly nationalistic and they don't tolerate diversity, right? They're interested in who people are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have a feeling there's about 6 of 9 people who are not listening to anything that's going on here. Is that true? Jim and Michelle and Canon and Andre and Mahmoud, are you with us here? Okay, then gotta be with us, right? Yeah, so there's a pretty strong nationalism here. And again, that's a real right-wing thing, right? That's what we're hearing in Prothero's show is like right-wing hate speech, basically. And so would you say that this is a fascist government? Yeah, it kind of is, right? It seems to have one person at the top. It's got this very clear kind of right-wing bias toward the nation and a rejection of diversity, of different people, and of different viewpoints, right? The news is entirely controlled by the government, right? Anything else we should point out so far from this film, besides that it's super violent? Good screenplay? Yeah. They do how do you say their last name? Wachowskis? Wachowskis? They yeah. Wachowskis. Yeah, they know how to do their action, if nothing else. Yeah, well, they like that all that Matrix stuff. They like invented that. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, they know how to do their action. Let's see. Okay, I think we should leave it there. Should we leave it there?
Sure.
We got 7 minutes left. 7 minutes? Okay. What's that?
Let's leave it there.
Just leave it there? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, we need a good long break before we sign off.
Okay. So let's leave it there. Tomorrow we'll come back. We'll watch a little bit more, and again, we'll be able to answer some more of these questions. Again, there's a virus going on here. There's more layers to the story, but we'll see that tomorrow. Okay, so pack it up, and I'll see you tomorrow.